Marco Rubio just said a few days ago, we will always be the child of Europe. In an attempt to appeal to conservative Europeans, for me that line was the straw that broke the camel's back. It's amazing how we just assume that the US belongs to the same civilization, or that we somehow, the US and Europe, belong to the same mindset or the same culture or civilization. And the reason why I am particularly mad at Marco Rubio is because up to this point, the concept of a Western civilization that encompasses both the US and Europe was a harmless delusion with no backing whatsoever. But it was a harmless delusion. But now we are seeing consequences of this. We have seen now, particularly, I was stunned by the Heritage Foundation, which has produced a document concerning how somehow the European Union needs to be dissolved for Europe to survive somehow. And we have seen already Elon Musk intervening in favor of AfD in Germany, or Trump's admiration for Viktor Orban, which sets a horrible precedent for the rest of Europe, as well as his support, for example, for Marine Le Pen, which I would say is a dangerous politician in Europe. MAGA already had some footing in Europe before Donald Trump's second term, but now it has exploded, and MAGA just wants to abolish the EU because they understand that it's a competence, and they understand that the EU is actually powerful. And this last paper they published, this document, whatever, Western civilization can only be saved if the EU is abolished, by the Heritage Foundation. It's just so absolutely outrageous. So I feel like we need to uproot the tree. The US and the Western world, as in Europe, do not belong together. They do not belong to the same civilization. We have two separate civilizations. We have America, or Americanism, which I would argue America is not a country, it's a religion. And then we would have Europe, Western civilization. If the US wants to keep Western civilization, like the label Western civilization, to themselves, I'm happy to give it to them. I don't care, really. The US might have started as an offshoot of European world or Western civilization, however you want to call it. They might have started as an offshoot or offspring of Western civilization, but they do not. We already are two very different mindsets, two different cultures, and two different civilizations. And by the way, going back to the whole label thing, I am very wary of this label and labeling things, and they don't work. They don't seem to have any weight to them anymore. And this whole what is Western world? What is Oriental? What is Eastern world? It doesn't. The whole concept just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm rather tired of this whole label thing because they don't mean anything. They don't serve any purpose. But going back to my point in this video, when I say that the US and Europe do not belong together, as in they do not belong to the same civilization, they are two different civilizations, what I mean is basically that we don't have the same values, and we don't share the same worldview, and we don't share the same mental framework. And just indulge me in this. Let's go back and try to see how Europe was born. Under which circumstances was Europe brought about? A civilization starts when a worldview is born, when a mental framework is born. A conceptual framework is manifested in literature, in arts, in architecture, in philosophy, in science, law, state, everything, every aspect of culture is influenced by the mental framework that is generated under certain circumstances. If you find an epic, if you find this, if you find a work of mythology that really brings something new, something that breaks with the previous tradition, then you are talking about a new civilization, something that wasn't there before. And I could argue that Europe did not start, or rather, the Western world did not start with ancient Rome. Rather, Europe is born in the ashes of the Roman Empire. Europe is born after the collapse of the Roman Empire. And what determines what happens in Europe actually is rather how the empire collapsed and how everyone was affected by this collapse. This moment of collapse of the Roman Empire begets a new socio-economic system, which is going to be feudalism. Feudalism becomes a socio-economic reality. I'm not saying that, Romans were suddenly, like, they woke up and one day suddenly there was feudalism. It took centuries. These things take centuries to cook. And if we are talking about feudalism took at least 200, 300 years to develop in what you know as feudalism. But it's nevertheless a new system which produces, which causes a new framework, a new mindset. At the center of this civilization, at the center of this new world that has a different socio-economic system that is feudalism, at the center of this, at the core, is the archetype. And this archetype is going to determine the world and literature and art. And in this case, feudalism is shaped around the figure of the knight. And what defines knighthood? Knighthood is defined by loyalty, honor, blah, blah, blah. It's Middle Ages ideology. But the ideology reflects this new core, this new world that is growing during these early Middle Ages. And in the case of Europe, the primal manifestation of this new world that is developing, it's the Arthurian cycle. And not only the Arthurian cycle, but rather all these works of literature that are about the knights. Arthurian cycle is perhaps the most complex, famous, and it's sort of like, if you want to find something similar, could be like, the MCU or something like this, where you have knights from different countries. You have Spanish knights, British knights, French knights, German knights. Basically, all of Western Europe, from Ireland to Spain to France, Germany, Italy, they all have someone in this huge epic, which is the Arthurian cycle. This is properly the Western world, as in, this is the Western half of the Roman Empire. Reviving from its ashes and creating something that is brand new. And I mean, brand new, all the elements were separated, because obviously you had warriors before, you had Christianity before the Middle Ages, you had horses, you had, but this moment in which feudalism starts becoming a socio-economical reality. This is when all these elements regained, are rearranged, recycled in a way that is brand new, and they create something new. There was no such a thing as the Arthurian epic cycle before. There wasn't such a thing as feudalism with all the sets of values and morals and religious aspects. There was nothing like it. We are talking about something that is brand new here. And the US has its own mythology. And you could argue, well, we don't have a mythology because, Christianity and so on. But I could argue quite the opposite, that in fact, the US has a mythology that we have seen evolve with our own eyes. The Founding Fathers is a mythology. The whole opera of the heroic Founding Fathers seceding from England and fighting for freedom and all this crap. All that is actually a mythology. I would argue a pretty a powerful, elaborate mythology that it's much like you could argue that all this knighthood thing is just ideology because they want to justify a socio-economic system, which is true. The same happens in the US. I think the US is actually like this. It's the whole propaganda of freedom and fighting for freedom and the founding fathers, the heroic deeds and so on. It's all ideological and bears little with no with little to no resemblance whatsoever with the actual facts of what happened during secession, or the reasons why the founding fathers wanted to secede from the British Empire. But there is a mythology. I could argue that that is a mythology, along with many other things, but that is a mythology. This epic is a mythology. The Constitution of Independence, the Constitution of the US and the Declaration of Independence, I could argue, are actually two religious texts that are prophetic in nature, or that are actually mythological and carry the same psychological value than the Arthurian epic might have carried hundreds of years ago here in Europe. And much like at the center of feudalism as a socioeconomic system, at the center of this new civilization in Europe is the knight, and the knight and knighthood becomes the topic of literature, and it becomes the archetype. The archetype, the hero, the archetypical hero of Europe becomes the knight. Something very similar happens with the US, where the pioneer, the figure, the concept of the pioneer, you could call it, much like there is knighthood, you could argue that there is pioneerhood, is the center of this new epic, of this new civilization that has its own rules, very different from those in Europe. I could argue that manifest destiny, just think of the concept of manifest destiny. If that is not a mythological thing, I don't know what it is. Manifest destiny is one of the core principles of what I would argue is American religion, because there is no Christianity in the US. Let's be honest here. I don't think there is a single Christian in the US. There are Americans in the US, and Americans, I'm not referring here to the inhabitants of the continent America. I'm referring here to the people that fully shares these values, these concepts, and this mental framework. And much like the Arthurian cycle is the materialization of the concept of knighthood and the idea of knighthood, I would argue that Hollywood has become this manifestation of the pioneerhood, if you want to call it like this. And this is fully materialized in the Western. The Westerns, John Ford and Howard Hawks, they are to the US what the Arthurian epic has been to us. And much like we have archetypes that play out in the Arthurian epic, I would argue that you have equally, like the US has equally a set of archetypical characters like the outlaw or the cowboy, the sheriff. All these are archetypes. They are just archetypes. But let's go, what is the core of this knight, or what is the core of this cowboy, of this pioneer? Every single movie made in Hollywood is about the same thing. You just watch the same movie play out over and over and over again. And it's basically that rules are never enough. The only way to make things right is to step out of the law and to stay out of the framework of the law and do your own thing, break the code, don't play by the rules, bad boy shit. Much like feudalism shapes the concept of the knight, as in the knight is a reflection of that society, the same thing happens in the US, where clearly these figures like the pioneer, the cowboy, are just reflections of this westwards expansion that takes place in the US under this manifest destiny concept. The US is built on the shoulders of these romanticized heroes that stepped out of the law, didn't play by the book, wanted to do their own thing, and this is how they could do the right thing. In the US, everything, like doing the right thing, like for you to do the right thing, you have to step out the rules. Like this is how you are cool. Being cool in the US, if you watch any movie done in Hollywood ever, is to step out the law and make your own thing. I don't play by the rules, and so on and so on. If you see movies like Shane, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Fort Apache, this is those things are the Arthurian epic cycle. But just notice the way in which the knight and the pioneer differ, because the knight prides himself in actually obeying every single tiny whiny rule there is, because there is no doing things right outside the rules. You may argue that feudalism had crazy rules, but that's not the point. The point is that for you to be a knight, you need to follow every single step. The following of the rules is actually what grants you the title of knight. You cannot be a knight if you don't follow the rules. It's impossible. There is no way of doing it. It's the only way to do the right thing is to follow the rules, because the rules are the right thing. Do you see the big difference between this and a cowboy, or the modern version of this, which is, I could argue, is a Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, whatever, which is people that literally, all these superheroes are basically people that are violating every single regulation possible just to do the right thing. But in Europe, doing the right thing is doing the rules. They're obeying, like following every single rule is the right thing. The right thing is nothing beyond what in the rules. If you read Lancelot, if you read Percival, Galahad, or King Arthur himself, everything is about these laws, this concept of being a knight, and being a knight is just a load of rules, a whole truckload of rules and norms and patterns that you have to follow. I would go as far as to argue that Kant's principles were already established in the Middle Ages. In the US, on the other hand, the hero that doesn't play by the book is the one that is rewarded, which is the very opposite of the knight. This is the whole concept of the US is this delusion that somehow rules are never enough, the forces of order are never enough, the government is evil, it's never enough, it's not good, and therefore the only way for you to do good is to be outside the law and outside the rules, which is Batman, it's Superman, it's Spider-Man, it's all these superheroes. It's just a delusion, like movies like The Dark Knight or Avengers or whatever. This is just the imagination. This is it's a reflection on the US's subconscious or unconscious mind. Everything from Guantanamo Bay to Donald Trump's kidnapping of Maduro is fully represented in this mindset of superhero-like behavior. And you may not believe this, but it's I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Donald Trump's behavior with the war here, Iran or Venezuela or here, it's already in these comic book characters like Batman, Spider-Man, or in the Western, in movies by John Ford or Howard Hawks. The pity is that at least John Ford and Howard Hawks were relatively critical of these values. John Ford in particular, in movies like Fort Apache or The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, at least has some brains and recognizes that all that is there is a horrible aspect to it, but that this is the mindset And these are two very different cultures. I'm sorry, but you will have to agree. So to wrap this up, I'm sorry to say this, but the US and Europe do not belong together. I'm deeply sorry to bring this to you, but we are not the same civilization. The US and Europe are two mental frameworks, two conceptual frameworks, are two ethics, two set of values, two different socioeconomic systems. I'm sorry, it's the way it is, and this fantasizing with getting us closer to the US. No, let's get literally as far from the US as possible.